we're packing some safety in the wintertime campaign material for the kids around Denmark. We can begin with the small ones, and then they can bring it to their kids when they grow up. So it's like creating a good safety culture.
One thing that the Cyclist Federation is very well known for is that we were the first one to push on to have cycle lanes in Denmark. So you have a separated lane for cyclists that are separated from the road and from the pedestrians, which is one of the reasons why it's so safe to ride in Copenhagen.
Copenhageners don't identify cyclists. It's like brushing your teeth. You don't identify as a toothbrusher. You just do it because it makes perfect sense in your everyday life. In the beginning of the century and in the 20s and in the 30s, cycling was the means of transportation in Copenhagen. Then with the 50s and the 60s, Copenhagen, as many other cities around the Western world, had a welfare boom. The middle class really was established, and cars also was really seriously introduced to Copenhagen. And slowly the citizens started to realize that the massive car boom also had some backsides. Concepts like air pollution, noise pollution, traffic safety that today we feel are natural to discuss when we develop our cities were introduced back then. In the late 70s and early 80s, we had massive demonstrations at City Hall with 100,000 citizens demanding the City Hall to prioritize cycling. The local decision makers actually started listening to the citizens. Another factor that also played a role was that Copenhagen was very poor at the time as a city. We were almost bankrupt. So we did not have the finances to construct the very grand highways that were actually planned and decided. And maybe that is our luck today, because today we have a city where cycling is again mainstream and we have more cyclists crossing the city center than we have cars. What happened around 5 years ago was that our local politicians, they noticed that you had cars. They took up 2/3 of the street space, but they only made out a minority of the people actually using the streets. So they wanted to reverse that to make it a more effective use of the space. So we took out 2 car lanes out of 4, half of the road capacity for cars. And we managed to increase the total use of the street with 20%. Because in general, in average, in one car in rush hour, you have 1.1 person. So for every 10 cars, you have 9 cars with 1 person and 1 car with 2 persons. So obviously, it's not a very effective use of space. In my work, I meet a lot of cities and experts and decision makers from all over the world who look to Copenhagen and maybe dream about becoming like Copenhagen one day. Having so good facilities for cyclists and having so many citizens choosing the bike as the normal choice. But then they often say, oh, but we don't have the budgets. We are not so rich as Copenhagen, or we don't have the space. Our streets are too narrow. And my answer is, cycling is by far the cheapest means of infrastructure. And cycling is one of the least space-consuming modes of transportation. So how can you afford anything else than cycling? How can you find the space for anything else than cycling? And remember, for all those who say, yeah, but I cannot switch from car to bike, that often up to 1/3 of all car trips in cities around the world is less than 5 kilometers long. So maybe some of those trips could be switched to cycling.